Alright, so this is part 2 of the animation lecture from week 7, and this time I'm just going to go through some animation tips actually in Maya. And some of this will include the graph editor, some of this will include just retiming animation or using other tools. So this is going to kind of be a mixed bag. And just as a side note, I'm not going to completely polish this animation or anything, because otherwise this will take forever. Watching other people animate is boring. There's just no other answer to that. It's just a fact that watching other people sit around for hours tweaking the pose of a character is just not that exciting to watch. So I'm going to try to keep this simple. First things first, so I need to make sure I have a camera. Most of you will probably already have one because you will have been designing your shot. Alright, I already had technically made a camera from when I was having an issue with the grease pencil tool. But I want to animate specifically for one camera angle and still use my perspective camera, but more as an editing tool or a selection tool rather than a viewing tool. So this camera I am going to lock, and I'm going to change my viewport layout to 2 panes side by side, and through this one I will look at the perspective camera. I'm also going to make sure I'm making use of my display layers. So I don't need to be able to see the inside of this environment. That's one thing. So luckily I had already preemptively made display layers for that. And I also don't need to see the pirate bot skeleton, and I also don't want to be able to select any of this stuff. So I'm basically going to make everything locked except for the NURBS controls. Technically, I might want to even make an image plane that is locked as well, just so I don't be able to select that. Now, as you can see, I already oh, notice that little thing there? I'm still able to select the skull, and that's because the skull is not in a display layer, so I might add that to the pirate bot layer, so I can't select it anymore. So yes, basically I use the 3-frame method to block in this shot. I didn't clean it up or anything, so there's still plenty of stuff to tweak about it. But, you know, just by following the reference footage, I was able to get this much animation put in. But what I want to do is clean it up a little bit, and also, more importantly, make some of the poses more interesting. So, first thing I'm going to do is turn on Auto Key, which is down here. And what that's going to do is make it so that every time I adjust a value that has already been keyframed somewhere in the timeline, at least once, it will automatically save that update. Now, one thing to be careful of with auto key is that by default it will only set a new keyframe or update the actual attributes that get modified. So if you notice here, only Y translate got keyed because that's the only thing that I actually adjusted on that frame. So just keep that in mind. The best workflow for this would be to do what I did, which is set a keyframe on every frame for almost all the controls, and then use auto key to either update those. So if I went on a keyframe that already exists and I changed it, then auto key would save that for me. Or if I went on a frame that didn't have a keyframe on it yet, it would create one. Now you can change the settings for that if you really feel like it. Under animation, you can make it key all attributes. Actually, I think that only works, it says on character sets. So maybe that would actually not work. I'm pretty sure I actually checked that and I just forgot about it. So yeah, that's just the way auto key is. It's just the what it do. I'm also going to do one extra thing in here. I think I might have done this already on my personal computer, so this might already be set up. Yeah, I set that if under time slider, I set the key tick size to 5 times bigger so that I have an easier time looking at those. All right, so let's get to it. Now, first thing I wanted to show you is the editable motion trail. So under animation and then under visualize, we can, if I have the root controller selected, I can create an editable motion trail. And I might just turn on show frame numbers. And that will create this literal trail that shows me in 3D form all of the positions of the various keyframes for that one object anyway. And what that means is that I can look for areas that are a little abrupt or not very smooth, such as this drop right here where it's just like suddenly goes down like that, and I can decide to maybe try and smooth out that transition a little bit rather than having it be that sudden drop. So this is not really a way, you know, here I might want a sudden drop because he's putting the weight down on the other foot, but this is not the, you know, ultimate fix everything automatically tool, but it does give you an opportunity to look for areas that you can make more smoothed out. That should probably be back and up a little bit. Now here, there's kind of a little weird thing happening, and this is actually where there's a spot where the root controller is staying completely still, which is not a good thing, because that means that, you know, the center of gravity, or just the center of my character, is somehow magically floating in space while things move around it. So anytime that weight is being shifted, that root controller should be moving. So here I'm going to loosen that up a little bit there by adjusting. And AutoKey is doing this for me because every time I adjust one of these keyframes, it saves it, and then that is reflected in the motion trail. And here, you know, it's not like you have to eliminate all abrupt changes. It's just that you don't want to have them where they shouldn't be, basically. Here you can also see from the top that some of these are off to the side, and I did that on purpose technically, but I think I'm going to put those back to being all in the same path, and then I'll adjust the left and right changes later. And this isn't going to show any rotation, so keep that in mind. Now, the other thing, as I mentioned, the editable motion trail isn't going to be the only thing we need to look at. I'm going to delete this. And also, the editable motion trail is really only useful for the root controller and the feet IKs, and if you have arm in IK mode, it's good for that too, because again, it only does translation. So things that are not translating, like FK arms, the spine, the neck, are not going to really be represented by the editable motion trail. So, and here, you know, I'm not really getting much out of this because it's already pretty smooth, so maybe I could just adjust that a little like that. And then his leg just stays there. Anyway, so editable motion trail, I'm going to delete that from the outliner here. The other thing is the graph editor might help clean this up a little bit. So if I go into the graph editor, and I only have one screen on my computer, so I have to kind of cram this in. Sometimes I like to do, actually have a setup where a saved layout where I can look at the graph editor docked down here. Now I just hit F there to zoom in onto one of these keyframes. What we can do here is look for disruptions in the animation on a per attribute basis. So this Y is largely going to be the same as the editable motion trail was, although that one still seems to be a little off there. But if we go to Z, you can see that this is a little wonky because, you know, each one of these raised I can't talk, raised or lowered keyframes is kind of the speed of the forward movement because he's moving forward in Z. So that speed is kind of fluctuating as he moves forward because of all these keyframes. So you could start by trying to straighten out this line and just making this a more consistent path. But what you could also end up doing a lot of the time is potentially just deleting some of these keyframes outright so that they just don't exist. And the animation, if they were already essentially in a straight line anyway, your animation isn't really going to change at all because, you know, that's what you were trying to go for in the first place. And if it does change, that might be for the best. So here, let me go back to my classic. Now I kind of smoothed out the timing of the forward movement of the root controller, and that might not necessarily be exactly what I want, but it kind of levels the playing field from my, you know, those were artifacts left over from my blocking that were never really resolved, and now I've kind of gotten rid of those so that I can go back to, you know, picking specific, you know, modifying the speed on my own without having to worry about what the reference footage was doing. Here I might want him to be a little higher for this passing position there. Actually, he'd probably be higher here than here. I think he might be lowering down a little bit too much there. I'm going to keep him raised up. And again, I'm kind of just eyeballing this, but checking my graph editor is going to allow me to literally see like the rise and fall of this Y and see where it might suddenly, you know, where it might need to be smoothed out a little bit so that there's a more ease in, ease out feel to the timing of that. Now, let's not get too carried away with polishing in the graph editor, because before we can get too far into that, we also have to think about just improving the poses in general, as I talked about in the last video. So one of the things I wanted to do was just make this arm movement look better overall, because I did follow the reference footage, and that's fine, but now I'm deciding as an artist that I want that to look more interesting and have more force to it and more of an arc and just look cooler. So what I might do here is, you might assume that I'm just going to go in straight to the arm and start editing the position of that, but actually we are still going to be controlling the root controller, and that's because everything always has to be animated from the core out. The core of your character influences everything else that it does, and so by animating that first will already be like 50% of the way there before we even start moving the arm at all. So here's what I'm going to do. When he, for this wind up, I'm going to kind of have him lean more towards this side and kind of put more weight onto this side of the body. Again, still you just using auto key, so I don't have to really think about saving these adjustments. Here, I'm going to kind of lean back like this and rotate the body more towards the camera so that the arm would be able to go back further. And I'm kind of trying to create this arc going around like this. Again, ooh, grease pencil tool. I basically want it to be more like that. And part of that is going to be making sure that the root controller is following a similar path. Not all the way out, of course, because that would be ridiculous, but so here I might raise him up a little bit higher. And these keyframes might be too close together, but here, so I'm kind of creating this small little circle within a circle of the root controller. And here I'm just going to move those keyframes so that there are two apart instead of one apart. I told you watching people animate was boring, didn't I? Now my root controller, again, I could use an editable motion trail to show you this too, but now my root controller is kind of doing this like, this little thing inside, like just on its own area. Now I could also adjust the spine. I'm trying to do as little work as possible by moving the important things, but I could also try moving / rotating the spine, thinking about line of action. So I want the curve to kind of go up this way. And I'm also going to I think I'm going to get rid of some of this spine bending right here. I might just delete this keyframe entirely. Obviously, I'm going to have to deal with the skull, which hasn't really been addressed yet, but... So, the point here that I'm trying to make is that if you look at this, there's a lot more of a cool arc to that skull swing, and I haven't even touched the arm yet. So the root controller is the most important thing. I can't say that enough. Now, I still need to go in and adjust the arm, of course. I can't just do the root controller, but so here I might do a little bit of anticipation by having the arm go more forward. And here I'm just going to be editing the clavicle and the shoulder. If you don't have a clavicle, then you can still just do the shoulder. And I kind of want to have that little circular pattern in this too. So here I might make sure that this is going out. And I might rotate it like this too. Here's the big one where it needs to be out here. I don't want the arm to be going before the root, so the arm should still be up if the root isn't down yet. And then here I might still go up, up, always readjusting. And a lot of these are just editing the existing keyframes from the blocking, so I'm not adding in a ton of new keyframes. I'm still just editing the keyframes from my original blocking and maybe putting in a few extra ones in between just with auto key. And almost all of this is based on silhouette too, so I want to be able to see that hand and that skull throughout this whole swing as a silhouette. And speaking of which, we could look at that. Now, this might be an area where I decided to change my timing a little bit. So first of all, I might save this file. Can't be too careful. And I might just grab all these controllers, and I like the timing of the end of this, so I might keep that and just move all that back a little bit. But then I might take this part and stretch that out slightly, and I'll snap that. And, you know, wasn't the most precise retiming in the world, but all I was doing was, again, making a decision. I want the beginning of the swing to be slower and the end to stay the same, so I need more time for the beginning of that arm swing, so I'm going to create space there. My phone is ringing, apparently. It's probably spam. Create more space there, and then stretch out my keyframes a little bit. So, a few different things, you know, all of this is without even going in, and I'm not even addressing the other arm yet, not even addressing the head yet. I'm probably not going to do any of that in this video, to be perfectly honest, because that's not really the point. But you want to work on the main stuff first before you get too carried away with, you know, what the other arm is doing or what the head is doing during that. And then I can still go in through this and further clean up parts of this in the graph editor. If I decide that there's something that's a little weird like this, then maybe I'll just delete that keyframe, or maybe I want this to be a little bit more smooth, something like that. Of course, it would probably help if I was actually at that part in the animation while I was editing this. Oh, well, the other thing, I didn't edit the elbow at all during that, so, you know, I might have to go through and tweak some of the elbow movement. All right, so one thing I might do here is grab the skull, and I'm able to click that through the outliner even though it's locked, because that's just how you can cheat in Maya. So here, right where he smacks the skull down, I'm gonna want to disable that parent constraint. So right here, there's already a parent constraint on it. I'm gonna hit S right here, and that creates this conflict between the keyframe that I just put and the parent constraint, and it also creates this blend parent. So I'm going to hit S again. Now blend parent at 0 means keyframe is entirely in charge. So I want basically blend parent to be at 1 every frame, and I'm going to hit S there too, every frame before right where it touches the ground. So I'm not only, by hitting S, I'm not only saving the blend parent, but it's important to note that I'm also saving the actual positions of these things too. So what that means is now you can carry the skull and then leave it on the ground. And then I might actually add a little bit of animation here where he comes back up faster. And clearly that end keyframe there is screwing things up, so I might just go with this. Just to show that it is being left on the ground. Now, now my animation has pretty significantly changed from the reference footage, but that doesn't mean my reference footage was useless, because I wouldn't have even been able to get this timing or this action correct in the first place without that reference footage being there. So I think that's all I'm going to talk about for right now. I don't want this to drag on too long. I did talk about a little bit more in class, but I think that this is all that's really necessary for me to go over. So I'm not going to bore you to death by doing more than this. We can talk more about this in class, but hopefully all of this is helpful for everybody. And remember, you still need, you know, as I just said at the very end there, you still need to do the blocking to even get to this point, unless it's a very simple scene that doesn't involve a lot of body movement. But this is taking into account that stuff I was talking about in the first part of the lecture about enhancing the poses, using the 12 principles of animation, and body language, silhouette, and line of action to a certain extent. Alright, cool. Well, that was it for week 7 lecture, and I will see you next week unless there's somehow miraculously another snow day exactly on Wednesday.